Hello, I'm doing a movie review. I'm Christian, in case you don't know me.
And I'm Bill Burns, and I'm here today with Christian to help him review
Titane. If I'm even saying the name of the movie right, I want to make that clear that I'm probably mispronouncing the title. I'm pronouncing it as Titane because that's just easier for me to pronounce, but I've heard other people pronounce it completely differently.
Yeah, I heard Titane.
Now, what Titane or Titane is a French horror drama film released in 2021. The film was written and directed by Julia. Do you have any idea how to say her last name?
Ducournau.
Ducournau,
Yeah.
Who also directed a really good 2017 film called Raw, which I did do a review on a few years ago if you want to check that out. Now, the film tells the story of a young woman named Alexia who as a child was involved in a traumatic car accident that left her with a titanium plate in her head. As an adult, she has become a model and a showgirl, and it is also revealed that she is a serial killer. And after killing one of her victims, she has what at first appears to be a dream where she has sex with a car, and the next morning she finds herself pregnant. That's really all I want to say about the plot before we get into spoilers, and trust me, what I just described only just scratches the surface of what's in this movie. Honestly, this is a movie where I feel the less you know about it before seeing it, the better. And there's gonna be spoilers in this review, so if you haven't seen this movie yet, I kind of recommend watching it first before watching the rest of this review. But Bill, what did you think of Titane?
I loved it. I thought it was amazing. I really, really enjoyed it. I thought that it's a great example of, we're starting to see these films sort of wondering what is, as we move in terms of technology into what's being called post-singularity, like what will the post-human kind of era look like? And I think a film like Blade Runner 2049, I believe this film, I think Cronenberg's Crimes of the Future are all films that are really starting to imagine, okay, well, what will it mean to be a human being once we get into a world that is totally technologized, in the metaverse, and where does the body still matter anymore when we can live virtually? So I think this is a perfect example of a film that really is sort of exploring that, well, what is a body? If we're moving into this sort of highly technologized, online, information age, digital age kind of world, well, what happens to the corporality of the body? What happens to the materiality of the body?
And I'm glad you mentioned Cronenberg, because this definitely does remind me of both the works of Cronenberg and J.G. Ballard as well. To a certain extent, I would almost consider this like a spiritual adaptation of Crash to some degree.
Absolutely. I think it takes a lot of the themes of Crash and really pushes them into this kind of 21st century kind of understanding of the body, technology, what our relationships are. I bet you Ballard would have loved this movie. I think he would have absolutely loved this movie.
Now, I want to point out that I thought this was a great movie. I thought it was an amazing movie, honestly. But I'm not going to pretend I completely understood everything going on in the movie. Like, the film clearly is making a lot of comments on gender, grief, loss, trauma, family, identity, and our relation to technology. At the same time, I don't know if I fully understand everything that Julia is trying to say with all the themes in the movie. You know what I'm trying to get at?
It's a very dense, complex film. It's not one of those films I think that you could just get a surface understanding of it. It's a very deep film. It is. I mean, she talks about so many different things in the film. The need for human connection. Like, how does one have connection to other human beings in a world that's becoming increasingly technological, increasingly virtual? Talks about family. What is the family going to look like in this new era that we're moving into? Will family relationships still be the same as they were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago? Will that look different? Like you said, gender, right? Are we moving into a post-gender world where gender is so fluid, where gender is so, can be changed so easily? What is that going to look like? What is that going to feel like? But in the film, she really sort of, I think, pushes it to the sort of an extreme understanding of what those things could be, right?
Yeah.
Like what is the connection between technology and gender? can we use technology now to change gender, to sort of to have a more fluid understanding of gender, So I think these are really weighty, important concepts, in our society that I think we're only beginning to scratch the surface of, where she really uses the movie, that uses art to really, propel it into all these other sort of facets that we might not be thinking about.
Now, what do you think of the main character of the movie, Alexia? I thought it was really interesting because before I saw the movie, I didn't realize that the main character was a serial killer, and I thought that was really interesting how you have a character who in any other movie would be the villain, yet here, and it's not so much like Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, whereas here, you can't help but to empathize with Alexia, despite the fact that she has killed a lot of people, and mostly innocent people, even though the first person you see her kill in the movie, frankly, the guy kind of has it coming because he's very, sexually aggressive towards her, but most of the people you see her kill are completely innocent, so it's you should hate this woman, yet when you see what she goes through, it's you do sort of empathize with her. Now, in the film, while Alexia is on the run from the police, she hears about this boy who went missing over a decade earlier, and he would be about her age now. So, in order to hide from the police, she breaks her own nose and shaves her head, giving her a more masculine look, and she ends up posing as this missing boy, much to the joy of the boy's father. Something I thought was also really interesting is when you're introduced to Vincent, the father of the boy. He's at times not always the most likable character. I thought that was also a really brave move on the director's part to sort of make this grieving father at times kind of an asshole.
Family is such a central concept in the film. The movie opens up where we're introduced to Alexia's family. We don't really know that much about it, but we could tell just from the early scenes, the father's a jerk. The mother is very sort of passive. And after the car accident, it's the metal plate in her head, and she comes out and she hugs the car. And I think one of the things it's showing there is we often look to our families for protection, for a model of how to sort of be in the world, how to be successful in the world, how to become a fully realized person. And clearly in her family, there's issues. So it's very interesting that she identifies with the car. She identifies with technology. She identifies with a thing, not with her family. So I think that might go towards explaining a little bit about her psychosis in the film. She doesn't see other human beings as other human beings. I think that she sort of lost her willingness to have a connection with other human beings or to have empathy for other human beings. She empathizes with a car, right? Because it's strong. It doesn't let you down. Vincent's connection with family, I think, is really, really interesting too. The fact that he lost his son, and he's so willing to, he so wants to believe that Alexia is her son, even in the face of so many red flags, right? There's so many things that pop up for Vincent that anybody else would be like, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. He will not see it, right? And I think it gets to the idea of, in relationships, human relationships, do we actually love the person for who they are, or do we love them for who we want them to be? And I think that's one of the things is he wants Alexia so bad to be his son. He's willing to overlook all these kind of, these contradictions and these weird things that are happening because he wants it so badly. He wants to love what he imagines to be his son rather than loving this person or even admitting to the fact that his son is probably never coming back.
I personally think he, on a certain level, knew from the very beginning that Alexia was not his son. He was so desperate to have his son back that he was willing to accept this random stranger as his son, because later on there is a point where he walks into the bathroom and he sees Alexia's breasts, realizing right then and there this is not his son, this is a woman, but he says, whoever you are my son and I love you.
Right. And again, but then on one hand you might say, well, that's a really nice thing to do, but again, I think it's almost that he's rejecting her actual identity because he wants so badly to have the son. He wants her to be so badly what he wants her to be, right? And again, it's one of those things where that can be very detrimental. I think sometimes parents do that to children. Parents want their children to be something, and the children are not that thing. Yet they still insist that they don't see the autonomy of the child. They want so badly for their child to be a doctor, to be a lawyer, to be this, to be a football star, right? Even though the child is like, I'm not that. That's not who my identity is. A lot of times, I think parents put a lot of expectations, right? They project a lot of themselves onto the children, and is that really some some people might see that as love, but some other people might see that as being very oppressive.
In terms of the themes of gender, like, there's sort of the stereotype of women are more, like, attached to children than men are, and, like, women are, according to the stereotype, are said to be more emotional than men. Like, eventually you meet Vincent's ex-wife, who you get the idea has kind of moved past the son. Like, she's kind of accepted that the son's never coming back. And when she meets Alexia, who Vincent thinks is their son, she immediately knows this is not our son. She's almost like the more logical one in that scenario, whereas, like, there's sort of the stereotype that women are the more emotional, more illogical, and I'm not saying I agree with that, that is what the stereotype is. So what do you think of that, how Vincent almost has the slightly more feminine role in that regard?
No, it's very, again, I think that's why this film is moving towards this post-gender an understanding of identity and of human beings, right? Is that, because if you think about it also too, Vincent is, even though he has that feminine side of caring, he also is like, he's got big muscles and everything, right? He's almost like this sort of like, the generic like macho man, right? He's got big muscles. He uses steroids, right? He uses steroids to keep his physique up, right? So again, I think it's very complex. Like, it's not an easy kind of, it's not an easy sort of exercise in understanding like, what gender is. I think this movie is really questioning that. Can people have multiple genders in the same, or multiple gender characteristics in a single identity or a single body?
And to sort of tie this into the whole body horror theme of the movie, there's definitely this theme of not really being in control of your own body. Like, Alexia can't control this pregnancy, just like Vincent can't control the aging of his own body.
Yeah, I mean, the movie is about transformation, right? How bodies transform, how identities transform, and the uncontrollability. I think a lot of times we want to believe that we're in control of our own body, right? We're in control of our own identity, and a lot of times we aren't. That's another Cronenbergian kind of a Cronenberg-esque theme that we have, And again, I think a central symbol in the film is fire. Right? We use fire. We think we can control fire, but fire can very easily get out of our control. It can destroy things. It's almost like it has a mind of its own that we can't control it. So if you think in the film, I think that's why fire becomes such an important aspect of the film. Right? There are times where fire can be very constructive, right? Where we feel we have it under control. Other times it can be very destructive when we have no control of it whatsoever.
Something that I also think is really interesting, if we want to like analyze the character of Vincent, is there's a scene, like, the character Vincent is a fireman and is a fire chief, actually, and there's a scene where they're doing sort of a fire simulation, and at one point he has a hallucination of what appears to be a charred child's body. And that does have a lot of implications for what maybe actually happened to the son, and perhaps he knows and maybe even in some way was responsible for the son's death. But what do you think of that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good insight. He could have repressed, right? He's, not only is he a father, and we always think about fathers protecting their children, but also he's a fire chief, right? So his job is not only to protect his own family, but is to protect all citizens, right, within his purview. So the idea, and also we also think of that as another aspect of gender, right? That males are supposed to protect. Right, that sort of if you are a male, your job is to protect people that are weaker than you, children and women, And so him failing not only as a father, but failing as a fireman and also failing as a male, right, could definitely make him sort of want to repress those feelings of guilt, those feelings of inadequacy, and just believe that this person that came into his life is his son. He isn't responsible for his son's death. There's the son right there. So he needs that reminder to sort of look at so that he doesn't feel like that failure.
Another thing I think is interesting is, even though the character of Alexia is a serial killer, she has plenty of opportunities to kill Vincent. At one point she even tries to, yet she doesn't. And I think that's because we see Vincent actually show her love, whereas she really hasn't had anybody show her genuine love before.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's a selfless love, right? I think that's one of the things. What we see up to this point is that the love that Alexia had was very selfish, in the sense of it looks like the person that's trying to love her wants something out of it. They want something back, maybe even more, than they're giving. Where with Vincent, you don't see that at all. If anything, he goes out of his way to not be to not sort of ask her for anything. Now, again, you could see that as selfish. You could see that as, he has this image in his mind and he just wants to focus on that image. That's selfish. Yet he doesn't really ask anything of Alexia at all. right? He doesn't ask any. He just wants just be what I want you to be. I won't ask any questions, and then you'll get my love, you'll get my support.
And I do want to point out, like, the film is beautifully shot and beautifully made, and like that party at the firehouse where like Vincent like lifts Alexia, or quote unquote his son, on his shoulders, and the whole scene's set to the Future Islands song, which is a band I actually really like. That scene is just beautiful.
The whole film is beautifully shot. I mean, just the look of the film is amazing. It's elemental, but also technological at the same time. It's an amazing mix of like the technological, the manufactured, the hard, the steel, right? Titane is a steel, right? That's why the name of the movie, I think, is Titane. It's steel, yet there's also these very elemental fire, emotional scenes. So her mixing of those two very different sensibilities, I think, is brilliant.
Earlier on in the film, when Vincent introduces the other firefighters to his son, or what he wants people to believe is his son, you see the other guys there sort of making fun of his quote-unquote son, because they kind of know, this is not actually Vincent's son. And like at one point, Vincent confronts them saying, "Here I am God, therefore my son is Jesus." Mm-hmm. And like it's sort of a joke, but even though Alexia doesn't necessarily represent Jesus, technically her pregnancy, though, is Immaculate Conception. So it's like, is there some sort of religious connotation being made there? Especially with the birth at the end of this new life form. You know what I'm trying to...
Sure, absolutely. No, yeah, I could definitely see that. Absolutely. Absolutely, right? Because this is going to be the new era, right? And just think about it. How, for the longest time, how did we sort of designate the different eras of history? Wasn't it before Christ and after Christ, right? So here we have the birth of this child is going to ushers in this new era. So yeah, I think you could that's definitely a valid way of interpreting it.
Honestly, I would kind of categorize this film as an example of magical realism, which is like sort of a subgenre of fantasy where it's in a world where magic exists, but it's a relatively realistic story, and sort of just magic is sort of mundane in the world, and like people know about it but don't really acknowledge it. I almost feel like this movie you could almost categorize as an example of magical realism.
Well, the French have the fantastique, right? They have a whole category of film dedicated to these kind of films. And so, of course, being a French film, I would definitely say this falls into that fantastique kind of genre. One of the things I thought about the ending that was really important is the fact that I think in the end, Vincent actually he has a sort of an epiphany. I think Vincent finally realizes that A, this is not his son, but B is that you have to accept people. If you're going to love people, you have to accept them for who they are. You can't project onto them what you want them to be. That's not fair to them, right? It's not giving them agency. It's not letting them have their identity. So in the end, when you have Vincent actually accepts Alexia, and not only that, accept the baby that is born from Alexia, I think that's a huge moment for the character of Vincent, that he actually learned something here, right? Is that he's going to love this baby not because if you think about it, if that really was his son, how could his son have a baby, right? I mean, that's just, it doesn't really sort of make sense. But since this is sort of afterwards, this is sort of, the after the, this kind of post-gender era we're in, then yeah, absolutely, this son could have a baby, and he accepts it. So to me, I think that's a huge important sequence in the film.
I liked how you compared this to David Cronenberg's most recent film, Crimes of the Future, because I honestly think Crimes of the Future was very similar to this. Depends on how you want to interpret the ending of the film and the baby that Alexia has. If this is not an isolated incident, like what if this really is the next phase of human evolution? That's very similar to some of the themes Cronenberg was trying to touch on with Crimes of the Future, and I actually think this and Crimes of the Future would make, honestly, a really good double feature.
Absolutely, yeah. I think they're both brilliant.
Now, I believe the director of this movie kind of wanted this to be viewed as almost like a spiritual sequel to her 2016 or 2017 film Raw. How do you think this compares to Raw?
Well, I think it's another movie about the body, right? About transformation, about change, about sometimes the inability to control ourselves, to control our bodies. So I think it definitely falls into play. But I think this is a quantum leap from Raw. Raw was a really great movie. I really liked Raw, but I think this movie is just like a huge, just step above. to like another level of cinema, of sort of genius.
Titane or Titane, I thought was an excellent film. It's not going to be a movie for everybody. Like, there are some people who are probably going to start watching this and be like, what the actual fuck? But I thought this was a great movie, and I recommend it highly, especially if you like more artistically driven horror films. Any closing thoughts on Titane?
I thought it was awesome. I think it's probably the best film I saw that year in 2021. And I'm very curious to see what Ducournau does next, what her next film was going to be.
So that was our review, and bye.
Bye-bye.